I'm here today with Kerry Connelly. Kerry's a best-selling author and has published 3 books and a number of articles and blog posts. You may recognize her from her 2020 book, Good White Racist: Confronting Your Role in Racial Injustice. She has been a certified coach since 2015 with several additional certifications. With over 25 years of experience in corporate, nonprofit, and entrepreneurial arenas, Kerry's a sought-after speaker and coach. In addition to her 3 books, she's the host of 2 podcasts and regularly appears as a guest on podcasts, radio, and live events. Kerry brings her passion for justice to everything she does, whether that's DEI training and consulting, her coaching, or her writing. With both the expertise of an academic and the relatability of a New Jersey snark, Kerry instantly creates a rapport with her clients and creates a container for real transformation to take place. Her new book is titled, Wait, Is This Racist? A Guide to Becoming an Anti-Racist Church. To learn more, you can go to kerryconnelly.com. That's KerryConnelly.com. So Kerry, thanks so much for joining us again. It's wonderful to, be able to speak with you, and congratulations on all your great work.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here as always.
Well, I just so much enjoyed, the first book, Good White Racist, was really an important book. And
Thank you.
I'm glad that it's gone so well, in terms of its impact. So congratulations on that too.
Thank you. Thank you.
So before we talk about books though, maybe you can tell people more about your background and the consulting work that you do, the non-book, related things.
Yeah. So, I think this whole journey into anti-racism started when I was already certified as a coach. And this whole journey into anti-racism started with my blog, Jersey Girl Jesus, which is pretty much defunct now, but that's when I kind of started the journey. And that's what led to Good White Racist. And after Good White Racist, I was doing a whole lot of book clubs with churches, and I have a long history in operational consulting and things like that. And so while I was after seminary, I wrote Good White Racist while I was actually in seminary. So now I've graduated. I have this Master of Divinity, but I have no desire to be a pastor whatsoever. I think I would do harm as a pastor. And I've kind of discovered that I think the magic for me really is in helping church leaders kind of go through a process of deconstructing their whiteness and helping their congregations to do that. And so I kind of come in and help churches work and nonprofits and corporate organizations as well, but primarily churches, help them to kind of understand where empire might be sneaking into their liturgical procedures and their operations, their hiring practices, everything from children's curriculum to the music that they sing. And it was kind of in my conversations with church groups that I realized that there was a need for a book that could help churches do this on their own if they couldn't hire me. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's great work to be done, right? I mean,
yeah,
a lot of work to be
done. there is a lot of work, and what's really interesting and what I love is how needed and how enthusiastic so many predominantly white churches are to really be engaging in this work, even when it gets hard, and it always gets really difficult. So
that's good to hear, that there's motivation to persevere through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So kind of looking at your writing life, how did you said it got started as a blog, but what got you motivated to do that and to do the books?
I've always gravitated toward writing. Writing was always the thing that I think I was best at. It was that I always had a way with words. But I never really believed that I could make a career out of writing. It was something that I just kind of had this story in my head that writing was really hard. It was filled with rejection. And then probably around 2015, I kind of gave up all of the attachment that I had to this idea of being a famous writer. And I will say I still have this harbor a dream of writing this beautiful novel someday, but I really suck at plot, so that's probably never going to happen. But I just have always loved books. I've always loved words. And so around 2015, I think it was, I just said, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to write for my own self. I'm just going to write a blog and maybe 3 people and my mom will read it, and that'll be fine. And that's what I did. And it started getting more and more traction. And then one day I pitched to Pathos, the website Pathos, and then it got picked up on Jersey Girl Jesus, got picked up there. And that's when my writing platform really expanded and grew exponentially. And that's how I got connected with WJK Books. And then the rest is that's where it all started. So
well, good for you. Good for you.
thank
And you
you.
know, as you said, it's not an easy, short, quick process, right? I mean,
No.
it takes a long time and a lot of perseverance and some luck in there, you know. I mean,
Yes.
and
And I think there's real truth to the idea that you have to be willing to write the scary stuff.
hmm,
And I think that was the thing that for me was the pivot point when I finally said, I'm not going to care who I might make angry with what I'm going to say. I'm not going to worry about that. And I started writing a lot more truthfully. And once I started writing a lot more truthfully, I got a lot more death threats for sure. But I also had a lot more people coming to me going, thank you so much for what you've been writing.
hmm.
And that's actually what led me to go to seminary was I started getting, because I was writing about LGBTQ plus rights, I had a lot of people that were writing to me and I found myself ministering to them. And I was like, wow, I think I need to go to seminary. So I really know what I'm talking about. So
Oh, good for you.
yeah, thank you.
You invested a lot, you know,
I have. Yes,
to
that's true.
to make it where you are now. So
Yeah. And it was in seminary where I was introduced to Black liberation theology and womanist theology. And that's also had a huge impact on the work that I do as well.
you can tell. So I mentioned that in the blogs for Compassion Christianity and How to Heal Our Divides, I've quoted, you know, Good White Racist many times.
Yes, thank you.
And I assume that book has done well. But
Yeah.
kind of tell us more about what that has been like since you published it, since we did the interview for that a while back.
Yeah, a while back, yes. I've been really humbled um, by the response to that book. And I have to say too, there are times where I cringe a little bit only because the book came out in March of 2020. And by May, if we all remember,
Yeah.
Minneapolis was burning, right? So that created, unfortunately, a very unfortunate awareness of the topic, right? So the book was already there and poised after the murder of George Floyd. I sometimes really, and I take this, I'm not being lighthearted when I say this at all. I'm being very serious, and I don't even know what the right word is, but I feel a deep, I don't know what the word is, a deep sense of responsibility, I think, because I feel as though if the book would not maybe have had the success it had if it hadn't been for what happened to George
Right.
Floyd,
Right.
and so many of the other, there were so many other Ahmaud Arbery all around the same time that happened. And there's such a deep sense of responsibility that I feel to do this work well and to do it with integrity. So it's been both an honor and a privilege to do this work, and a responsibility I take very seriously, because I feel as a white person doing this work, I have a lane that I need to stay in. And I try to do that really well. And then it's an honor. It's an honor to do this.
Well, you know, one word that I encourage authors to use around this area is stewardship.
Yes,
You've
it's a
been a
great
good
word.
steward of the opportunity that you were given,
Mm,
right? I mean,
yeah, yeah.
so I'm so glad to hear your perspective on that, because I
I
think,
love that word. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's oftentimes it's used like for financial giving at a church or things like that.
Hmm.
But I've heard other people use it in this kind of a context. Actually, some of the marketing
Hmm.
folks that I pay attention to who are also spiritually, you know,
Hmm.
strong too, will use this
Yes.
word about being a good steward of your audience, of your
Yes.
opportunity, of your privilege, of, however
Yes.
there's a lot of different dimensions that you can look at.
Oh, I love that.
Apply that term.
Especially the idea of being a good steward of our privilege. That, Brian, that is totally going to show up in a blog post.
Good.
So thank you.
Well, send me a link to it so I can, repost it.
I definitely will, because that is a beautiful way to think about it. And I think I'm working on a curriculum called How to Stop Being White and Start Being a Better Human. So, and that will be for individuals. And I think that's definitely going to show up in that curriculum too. So I will give you credit.
Well, it wasn't I just listen to other people and I take their ideas. I never think of anything originally myself.
Well, that's true of all of us. So, we just mix them up and present them differently. But I think that's a beautiful way of thinking about it. And especially about white-bodied privilege, as how can we steward that in ways that redistribute resources and provide provisional safety for embodiment. I've been doing a lot of thinking about embodiment lately, and I think that's such a beautiful way to think about it. So thank you for that.
Well, for me, I put out 4 different email newsletters.
Mm-hmm.
Every 2 weeks they're staggered. How to Heal Our Divides, Compassion Christianity, Writing for Your Life, and Publishing in Color. And so each time I do that, I try to think of, how am I nourishing this audience?
Yeah.
How am I being a steward of the, fact that there's some folks that are subscribed to this stuff?
Yes.
And try to serve that audience as best I can. So that is one of the mindsets that, I've tried to adopt and try to live.
Yeah. It's similar to the way I approach whiteness and discussing whiteness with white people, because I really do believe that as I think about dominant systems of dominance and identities of dominance that move within those systems, I really do believe that dominance harms the dominant identities as well. And so I really think that helping white people to deconstruct our whiteness is an issue of urgent pastoral care. And that's one of the reasons why I am passionate about my work with churches, is that I do really believe that we need to deconstruct this constructed dominance in our psyches as a matter of our own restorative healing,
Yes,
not even the social implications and the ways that our racism impacts BIPOC. We need to start doing it for our own healing first and foremost, and then the rest will heal the world.
So let's get to the new book. I mentioned the title is Wait, Is This Racist? A Guide to Becoming an Anti-Racist Church. And you touched on this a little bit, but what motivated you to write that book, and how did the book come about?
Yeah, so after Good White Racist came out, I did hundreds, maybe it wasn't quite hundreds, but it felt like it, of book clubs with churches. And because it was the pandemic, I did a couple a week, all on Zoom, and they were such great, rich conversations. And I started thinking about, okay, well, what's the next step? Like what's the next step after a church reads a book? What's next for that church in order to become truly anti-racist? And I do believe that the church needs to be thinking about this because of how deeply embedded Christianity as an institution is with systemic racism, right? And so I started kind of developing what I was calling at the time a curriculum. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe how can I help church leaders to really lead their churches, their organizations to becoming anti-racist? And that's when I started working on that. And I was like, well, hold on a second. Maybe this could be a follow-up book for these churches who are interested in it. So I got in touch with WJK Books, and they were really excited about it. So that's what we did. And of course, it's super important, I think, for white people to be resisting any kind of platform hoarding or celebrity culture, and also to be submitting to voices of color. And so that's why I invited Josh Riddick and Brianna Clover, who are 2 amazing colleagues and professionals, to write this book with me. So, and they are 2 people of color who are very well versed in church consulting as well.
Okay. I wasn't familiar with either one of those names.
Yeah, they're brand new to writer. This is their first book for both of them. So,
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, talk a little bit been about the collaborative process of three people trying to write a book together.
Oh, yes, that was fun. So yeah, I mean, I think we got into a really great system. Google Docs is awesome for
Yes.
collaborative work.
Amen.
Yeah, I love it. And we basically what we did was I would write, we worked on the outline. I had already given them the outline. I developed the outline. I was like, this is what I want to work on, so that they could kind of get an idea of what they wanted to talk about. And then I would write the chapter, give the chapter to them for their review, and receive, first and foremost, so I could receive their feedback to make sure I wasn't saying anything white and stupid, so like, let's make sure I'm not doing harm here, right? So that was the first thing that they helped me with. And then they wrote their responses as well from their vast personal experience, their professional experience, and their knowledge on the topic. And what I love about their input too is that so often churches who care about this very often will have one or two BIPOC, and I'm using that term BIPOC. I was using BIPOC. I've learned since to add the L for Latinx, but I just want to acknowledge too that kind of does not acknowledge the Asian population, which has a primary form of oppression, which is erasure. So it's problematic, but language is problematic as we're learning this. But so they were able to bring in a perspective, because so many churches will have one or two people of color on their staff, and those people end up bearing a huge burden that I don't think the other white people in church staffs are aware of. And so they were able to, Josh and Bree were able to offer some care and sustenance for BIPOC people who might be reading this book on staff, and also help white staff members understand better how to care for the people of color in both on their staff and in their congregation. So it was a great perspective that they brought.
Excellent. That is very valuable.
Yeah.
And so it might be obvious to you and I, but I'm not sure that it is to everyone, that you don't have to be a diverse church in order to work on anti-racism.
Right.
You
It's
shouldn't.
so important.
You shouldn't have,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. So
talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. That's one of my favorite topics, because I actually, I think one of the first go-to that most white people will go to when they say, okay, anti-racism, what are we going to do? They're like, we have to be more diverse. And that's not necessarily a good thing. I actually am not a huge fan necessarily of, quote, diversity, recruitment, because one of the things that I think white people skip over is doing the work in ourselves to ensure that we are creating a safe place for the BIPOC who are coming into our churches. And so if a white church hasn't begun to do that work, to really do the deep work of introspection and self-reflection and healing our own internalized whiteness, then we're not going to be a safe place. And also, I think it's entirely okay to recognize that BIPOC need BIPOC only spaces. And that's one of the things that I will work with a white church to help them understand, that one of the ways that they can care for their communities of color is to create BIPOC only spaces, affinity groups, things like that, so that, because I'm not, everything that I have learned from my beloveds who are Black and brown is that whiteness is exhausting, and to be constantly in the space of whiteness is really exhausting. And the closest I can come to understanding that is to understand how refreshed I always am when I'm in the presence of women only for so long, right? Where I can let it all hang out. I don't need to put on any defense mechanisms against any kind of potential microaggressions I might experience as a woman. I can understand what it's like to need a space that's only women only. And so I think that one of the most hospitable things that white churches can do is to understand that BIPOC sometimes need BIPOC only spaces, and that's okay. And that doesn't mean that you can't be, even if you are only a predominantly white church, that you can't be incredibly and powerfully anti-racist, because a lot of racism occurs in white-only spaces. When, oh, I feel comfortable now, I can tell the racist joke because there's not a Black person here, right? Well, as a white person who's in a white-only space where racialized contexts are occurring, how are you going to show up and to be anti-racist even in the white-only space, right? That's just as important, if not more important. Well, it's just as important. I'm not going to say more important, but it's just as important as using your privilege, being a good steward of your privilege in mixed spaces as well.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think, quite frankly, in my view, that's more where the problem needs to be solved.
100%. Yes.
These in white predominant organizations,
Yes.
not just churches. I mean, it's
Nope.
not limited there, right? I mean, it's
right.
much more broadly than that. But
100%.
The fundamental problem primarily, not exclusively, but primarily resides. In any event, let's talk about how the book is intended to be used by churches and lay people.
Yeah, that's another important. This is definitely not the kind of book where you just kind of sit on the couch on a Saturday and read through it. It's interactive. It's got questions at the end. It's meant to be journaled and talked through. So ideally, what I would love, the way I would love for churches to be using this is to be using it in a group setting, where everybody's reading the book and doing the workbooks and the questions at the end of each section, and then actually applying it. So it's organized by different operational parts of your organization. So there's leadership, preaching, liturgy, music, children and youth, just to name a few. And so making sure that there's having, as a leadership team, coming together and really going through and doing an audit of all of your operational practices. So the book is set up so that the first part of the chapter helps you understand why it's important. So why is it important to ensure that empire is not sneaking into your music and your liturgy? What makes that so important? And then once you understand why it's important, then you can move into the action steps of, okay, let's go through everything that we're doing and really start paying attention to this and make changes. And what I really try to do as well is help people understand that sometimes their most beloved traditions may need to go, and that's okay, right? And that they're going to get pushback. So I try to, my co-authors and I try to really provide the resilience that leaders will need in order to lead and move their congregations into a truly anti-racist space.
Very cool. Very cool. So there's not a separate leader guide or discussion guide or anything. This is all embedded in the book, right?
Everything is embedded in the book, but there are additional resources on the WJK website. So for example, there are questions in the books, but in the book, you can download PDFs of those questions off of their website.
Good.
And you can also find on my website, and I'll give you the link you can put in show notes and stuff, but there's also a conversation that Bree, Josh, and I had together because we wanted to kind of model what does an interracial website conversation look like.
That's no problem. Good. I'm really glad to know about that. So one of the things that kind of strikes me about what we're talking about here is that, the churches are going through a deconstruction process. I mean, for lack of a better term, I know that's got some baggage associated with it, but kind of that what they're doing in this state, in this around race. My question is, do you think this will help churches do deconstruction perhaps around some other areas that they may need to struggle with too?
Yes. So we're super intersectional in the church, in the book. In fact, I know that somewhere in that book is a line. That's Rosie, my dog, if you can hear her.
Dogs, children are always welcome to any Writing for Your Life event. So don't worry about that at all.
Awesome, because she's making her presence known. But I know that somewhere in the book, I can't remember where, but somewhere in the book there, I do talk about the fact that you cannot be anti-racist and also not affirming of the LGBTQ LGBTQ community, because it all goes together. You can't, if a Black gay woman walks into your church, you can't say, we affirm your Blackness, but not your gayness and not your femaleness. So that's not going to be allowed to lead or do anything like that or teach a man. No. And I've had experiences. I had one teaching pastor of a large church near my house shortly after Good White Racist came out. He asked me to come to coffee. I won't even get into the ways in which so many white men are more than willing to ask me to do labor for free, to teach them personally, tutoring them. I even bought my own coffee at that one, by the way. But it's crazy. We won't even get in there. But he sat down with me and asked me all of these questions. And I know for a fact that his church is non-affirming and that they do not let women teach or preach. And I said to him, you can't do one without the rest. And a year later, that church came out with a statement. And I think you could probably find this on my blog where their statement might be in the book notes. They came out with a statement where on racial equity, where they determined that they were no longer going to use the word racism.
Wow.
So
Wow.
That's such a white thing to do. And it's also indicative of how if an organization cannot affirm the full humanity of a person, they are not going to be able to truly engage in any kind of anti-racist work. So there's definitely, and that is clear throughout our entire book.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We pull no punches on that.
Good. I mean, amen. But maybe there's an opportunity for a follow-on book, talking about extending the practices, more, what do I say, intentionally to some other area. I don't know. It's just an idea.
Yeah.
I think it's important. I think,
Absolutely.
if churches can go through this, with race as the number one thing that they're trying to, I'll use the word again, deconstruct. That's such a wonderful thing, such an amazing thing. But if they're successful in doing that, then I think it adds vitality and opportunity more broadly within a church.
100%. It's so important. And, what this journey has led me to in my next book, and I am hoping to have an agent for this next one, hint, hint, anybody who might be listening, but my next book, I want to write about dominance, systems of dominance and identities of dominance and how they are ultimately fragile, right? And that's why we tend to cling so tightly to these constructs of dominance, is because we're so terrified, right? And we don't need to be. And so that's really, I think that's kind of speaking to what you're talking about. And Christian dominance is one of those. The dominance of Christianity needs to be deconstructed as well.
Surprise.
Shocker.
So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I want to explore a little bit more about the whole idea of, a white person doing anti-racism work. Can you just talk about like the challenges you've seen associated with that and how you've overcome that?
Yes. Every day I question, do I still belong here? Do I still belong in this work? Because there are white people who are doing this work without a whole lot of integrity, I think. I think being paid as a white person to do work, anti-racism work is deeply problematic, and I recognize that. I have a statement both in this book and on the blog, on my website, about my stance on this. But every day I'm reviewing my position, right? Because just like white people are not a monolith, Black and brown people are not monolithic either in their opinions. So I receive a lot of support and a lot of Black and brown people who are like, thank you, we need white people doing this work. And then I have people who say, what can a white person really do to become anti-racist? Andre Henry says, isn't that equivalent to self-annihilation? And he's not wrong, right? He's not wrong. We do actually need to really deconstruct ourselves, our whole identities, and it's a painful process. And that is why I have figured out what I've kind of finally come to and figured out is that my place in this work is to be a companion to other white people as they do that difficult journey through their racial deconstruction. Because first of all, that should not be the labor of BIPOC people. It should not, nor do I think that they are fully equipped to understand what it's like to be a white person who is deconstructing this identity of dominance, right? And so, and what that feels like, and the pain of the defensiveness that we feel, and how that transmutes into actual real grief once we begin to understand and lay down our defensiveness. And I think the sense of overwhelm that a lot of people who are truly engaging this work will start to feel. And inevitably, what I've come to realize as I'm working with so many white churches is that there comes a point in time where whiteness will start to rear its ugly head. So there's usually a task force or a team that's at a church that's decided, okay, we're going to do this work. And everybody's gung-ho. They're like, yes, we need to do this work. And they're so excited to put up on their website that, yes, we're doing this work, right? Yay, we're going to be anti-racist. But then and I tell the teams that I work with, this is not the work. All of this preparatory work where we're giving the reports and we're telling them we're making their suggestions, that's not the work. The work is going to come when you're actually asking somebody to relinquish some of their privilege, their dominance, their power. That's where whiteness is going to show up. And that's always the point, because whiteness is so sneaky. We do it with demands for precise language in a report. And we do it with stalling efforts. We're going to put off, we're not going to review your report for another 3 months, or we're not going to approve this until you fix this one word. Or we have all of these ways that we stall and stop the work from happening. And that's where white people who are really engaged in this work get frustrated and say, I quit. I give up. This is too hard. And that's when I say, oh, no. This is the work. This is the actual work that we're here to do, right? And so that's where I kind of come in and act as a real companion and a guide to other white people and tell them we're in this for the long haul. This is going to be a lifelong endeavor. And that, again, that should not be the labor or the responsibility of our Black and brown siblings. They have thriving to do. they have stuff that they have their own brilliance to go nurture and bring to the world, right? So that's how I determine my role. When it comes to being paid, I think it's really important to number one, I always support economic reparations on a national level. And number two, any work that I do, including work from the book, I tithe 10% to organizations that support Black and brown thriving. So that's how I approach that topic.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Kerry, it's fantastic work. I mean, thank goodness you're doing this stuff. You're kind of like pushing the envelope where the envelope needs to be pushed. Is kind of my view.
I am an Enneagram 8, so that explains it.
So you touched on this a little bit, but I want to hear more about the future work that you've got in mind.
Yeah, So I am, as I said, I'm working on a curriculum. It's going to be the same curriculum for individuals and for organizations, but it will be called two different things. For organizations, it'll be called Deconstructing Whiteness. For individuals, it will be called How to Stop Being White and Start Being a Better Human. Mostly because I don't think organizations will feel comfortable trying to distribute to their people and something called How to Stop Being White. I think that'll freak them out a little bit. But ultimately, it will take people through an entire understanding of how whiteness will show up and how it's been programmed into us, and then how it shows up in our inner landscape, interrelationally in our interpersonal relationships with other individuals, and then on a societal level. And then it will talk about what we can do to deconstruct that. So I'm working on that. What I'm also really excited about is Brianna Clover, who is my colleague on the book. She has developed an amazing assessment called the Ready Assessment, which is an assessment that organizations can use to help determine their organizational readiness for anti-racism and DEI work. And we are creating one specifically for churches based on the book. And that's going to be available in the next month or two. And that is such an invaluable tool. It's going to be so great. And then hopefully I'm working on an outline for my next book called Dominant, and working title Dominant. And that's all about identifying and deconstructing all of the identities of dominance within the North American culture.
Excellent. Excellent. Good for
Yeah.
you. That's so exciting to hear,
Thank
Kerry. I'm
you.
so glad for you and so glad you're doing this work. And when
Thank
that
you.
tool comes out that you just mentioned, please send me a link to it.
Absolutely.
I'll make sure that
Totally.
I get the word out about that too.
Great. I will definitely do that.
So again, the title of Kerry's new book is Wait, Is This Racist? A Guide to Becoming an Anti-Racist Church. And you can learn more about it at kerryconnelly.com. Kerry, I can't thank you enough for all the work that you're doing. I'm so glad to be able to, just find out about it and share about it.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. I so appreciate all of the work you do to support writers and to support the work that we do. And I can't wait to be at your next conference. So thank you.
Good. Well, I can't wait either. All right, Kerry, thanks again.
Thank you. Take care.